Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our session today. I know that it switched to Zoom last minute, so we really appreciate you guys being flexible. Um, Today's session is going to be on interviewing. So, interviewing 101, what to say and why. This is super informal, so if you have any questions throughout it, like feel free to stop us and ask, or you can ask it in the chat or message one of us personally, and we can share the question for everyone to hear. We're really just here as a resource for you guys, and we hope it's super helpful. So, really feel free to ask as many questions as you have. We're super excited for this. So if everyone could just scan this QR code really quick to check in for this session, just so we can track attendance and then keep you guys up to date on the slides and anything after. So we have your emails, that would be great. I'm just gonna give everyone a second to do that. Okay, awesome. Hopefully everyone had time to do that. If not, I'll put the QR code back up at the very end so people can scan in then too. So we're just gonna start introducing ourselves. Jess and I are leading this session. So just like a little like, who are we? Why you should trust our advice on this kind of thing. My name is Lila. I'm a junior here at USC. I'm a public policy major with minors in legal studies and criminality and forensics. I'm a Hayes Barnard Fellow in sustainability through USC Marshall. And then extracurricularly, I'm part of USC Hellenes, the Student Sustainability Committee, Spark SC Activist Incubator, and then I work here at the Career Center as an industry insider intern. A little bit about my work history and my experience that got me to this point. I worked at Mario's Italian Lemonade, which is a restaurant in my hometown, for about 5 years. I was a server and a manager there. I know that's not like traditional internship experience, but I like to include it just because I think it was super helpful and super fundamental to kind of who I am as a person and employee now. And so I still have it on my resume just because it was a very formative experience. And then I worked as an intern at Chicago Fair Trade for 2 years. They're an environmental and economic justice focused nonprofit. I worked a lot in fair labor and workers' rights and community engagement. So that was a super interesting experience. Last year, I worked at the USC Peace Garden as an intern through the President's Sustainability Internship Program here at USC. Super awesome experience. I know they're recently recruiting for that cohort. So if anyone's interested, like feel free to shoot me a message because I feel about that and I'm happy to talk about it. And then most recently and probably most relevant, I worked last summer as a congressional intern for US Senator Duckworth. So I was working on legislative research. I was working with constituents. I was doing a lot of outreach and casework for her team. If anyone is applying for any of those internships, I know that that just closed. So if anyone's in that application process, also happy to answer questions. And then I'm working right now at the Career Center. And then we're just gonna go to Jess.
Hi everyone, my name is Jess. I'm a senior. I'm a communication major here at USC and a cinematic arts minor. And on campus, I work with the Daily Trojan. But then off campus, this is some of my work experience. I'm currently a PR intern at the Lee Andrews Group. It's a public policy-based PR group here in LA. And I'm also a USC Career Center Industry Insider. I am the entertainment, communication, and media intern. So if you have any questions or any interest in that field, I do have office hours in that field, especially. And then I have a bit of experience in the publishing industry where I worked at Abrams Books as a publicity intern, and then at Distil Godrich and Brett, which is a literary agency that represents authors like Colleen Hoover. So I was kind of just doing working with manuscripts and books and the agents. And then I worked at David Arkin Consulting, which is a digital media firm where I was basically just helping out with news outlets based in North Carolina and Georgia. And then the first internship I actually ever had was at Dolphin Entertainment, where I was a production intern, basically just doing script coverage and helping out with some casting. So yeah, if like I said, if you have any, interests or questions in this field in particular, please let me know because I do have a variety of experience in the field.
Awesome. Thank you, Jess. So yeah, Jess and I have kind of very specific industry experience, but we're also, I think the advice we're going to give for this presentation is like very applicable across industries. Like it's not industry specific. So if you're watching this as like a biochem major and you're like, they have no idea what they're talking about, like this is still helpful advice. And we hope you'll get that out of it. Okay, so we're just going to get started with a quick little outline of today's content. So this has to do all with interviewing and then the steps after interviewing. So we're going to go over interviewing tips, common question recruiters and interviewers might ask you, how you should answer those questions, what questions you should ask them, and then what to do post-interview.
So, in terms of interviewing, it's always important to know who your interviewer is. And that person might be either a recruiter, an associate, or a manager. And by highlighting kind of which level this person is at, you're going to attack it just a little bit differently. It's also notable to recognize that it's different in a first round interview versus a later round interview, where in an application cycle with, one or more interviews, the first interview is often a screening interview to make sure that you're like a real person, you have real interests. And this is often not with a member of the team you're actually working on. It's usually a HR manager or recruiter, or it could even be a HireVue, which is literally just an AI kind of interviewing platform. And the typical cycle of interviewing would be that first interview, which is either a HireVue or it's with a recruiter. The second would be with a team member, and then the third would be with the team lead.
And then also for different internships, like there'll be different number of interviewers. Like you can find some that it's just one interview. You can find some that it's no interview. You can also find some where it's like three going on four. So it really just depends on the specific job. But this is kind of like the typical layout. So regardless of the round or who your interviewer is, you should always be able to enter an interview and being able to answer these four questions. So you should be able to answer why you, why this company, why this role, and then you should come prepared with a personal growth example of like a positive past work experience that you have under your belt that you could pull out whenever they ask you a question where that would be applicable. So they're not necessarily just going to ask you those questions straight up. They're not just going to be necessarily why you. Sometimes they might be, but a lot of times that question is going to be veiled within a different question. So some examples of questions that you might get that what they're trying to get at is why you is tell me about yourself. Why are you a good fit for this role? How do your past experiences relate to this role? What makes you qualified for this role? Or even walk me through your resume. I think walk me through your resume has become a little bit outdated. I haven't personally seen it when I've been interviewing, but it definitely is a question that recruiters have asked. So just be prepared to answer that.
Yeah, I find that especially with the, tell me about yourself kind of question, it's a great opportunity to both get in information that's strictly just from your resume and then also demonstrate a little bit of personality and even those kind of like small little interests outside of you as just a professional. I always like to highlight that I'm a big reader and a writer because those are things that as, soft skills are valuable to the jobs that I'm applying for. And even though that's not, direct experience for my resume, it's something kind of cool to highlight. Yeah. So then in terms of the next question, it'll be like, why this company or this organization? And like we mentioned before, it's not always going to be strictly one of these questions. It's going to be something in the wheelhouse, but this is your opportunity to share all of the, important research that you've done about this role and about this organization to demonstrate why you really want to work there and why your skills and professional experiences are applicable to the job.
So any of those questions could be asked. And the most important thing is to show that you've done your research, show that you know what the company is, you know what the organization is, and you know why you want to work at it. So you know that your career aspirations or your goals align with this company, and it's not just like any other job you're applying for, it's you want this company specifically. The next kind of question is the why this role question. And so this is a really good chance to show that you've read the job description, you understand what they're asking you to do on a day-to-day basis. Like we'll go over this in a couple of slides, but like they'll usually in a job description have like what an intern would do. And that's the time where you want to mention how excited you are to do these specific things, how excited you are to learn these specific skills. If you don't have a skill yet, how excited you are to like grow with that at this role. Those are all really good things to highlight in a why this role question.
So when it comes to like the personal growth questions, you want to make sure that you're approaching it the right way because sometimes they can feel like a bit of a trick question when they ask you, tell me about your weaknesses or a time that you failed or, a time you were a leader. You want to make sure that you're definitely highlighting something actionable, that you were able to contribute something, and even if there was a pitfall involved, that you learned from it, that you've been able to grow. So this is definitely not something you want to just say, the only thing you're bad at. You don't want to highlight a weakness. You want to, yeah, highlight a growth spot.
Yeah. And then we're going to go through in a couple of slides, like how to specifically do this and like how to tell a story. But you really want to make sure that you're not just like rambling on about an experience, that you have like a very concise, like narrative arc and story to tell. Okay. So now just mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I think that a lot of times when I get asked about this, like the thing people are most scared of is the like tell me about yourself question. It's oftentimes the first question interviewers ask, and there's kind of this like, what do I say? How long should I talk for? Like, have they read my resume yet? Like, you kind of just don't know how much information they know about you. And so I think that's a question a lot of people struggle with because of that. So our top tip, like I highly recommend you do this before any interview, is prepare like a 1 to 2 minute elevator pitch, like style kind of like spiel about yourself that you can use to cater to that specific position. So if they do ask you that question, you're not just kind of like floundering for an answer. You have like a good, concise statement you can say that's not too long, not too short, and covers enough information. You're never going to really be able to know if the interviewer has read your resume or not. So, you want to talk about that as much as you can, but also it's one of those things you just got to give them the information that you can in that short period of time because you also have the rest of the interview to talk about all the other things you've done. So these are kind of our tips for that question. So things you want to mention in it, your name, your year, your major, if you have any minors, your area of academic interest. Recent experience is kind of the one I highlighted as almost the most, not the most important, but a really important one that I think a lot of people miss. It's important to talk about like what you're doing recently, especially in the internship world, and then what that's taught you and made you interested in. And then finally, why you're interested, excited about this position. Why does it like align with you and why do you align with internship? And then I always like to end it with like a thank you, and just like I'm excited for the rest of this interview. So Justin and I actually wrote out our little like 1 to 2 minute spiels that we would have if we were asked this question. Obviously, because there's no job description, like there's a couple of like blanks in it, but it's just to give you an idea of what we would say. And it's also cool because they're both kind of different, but they're both equally good. So this is my blurb. So if someone would be like, okay, tell me about yourself. I'd say, of course, my name is Lila Aspen. I'm a junior at the University of Southern California, studying public policy with minors in legal studies and criminality and forensics. I'm very passionate about the intersection of policy and social justice, specifically environmental racism, reproductive justice, and prison reform. I recently worked as an intern for U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth, where I gained skills in legislative research, policy analysis, and constituent communications. That work, in addition to my experience working in the nonprofit sector, has made me very interested in pursuing a career in public policy and social impact work. Something that makes me very excited about this position. And then like XYZ position interests me because of, whatever reason. And then thank you so much for your time. I'm super excited to talk to you more about this position. And obviously, like you're not going to read that off as a script. Like it's going to sound much more natural when you're saying it in person. So you just want to, what I always do is right before an interview, I read over my elevator pitch a couple of times just so I have it fresh in my head. And then obviously, like you can change it once you're in there and make it more natural to like kind of fit the tone of the meeting. But it's nice to just have something prepared going in so you're not just like floundering.
Yeah, so then this would be mine. Again, this is just the general one that I tend to use for most of my interviews. Again, I do tweak it per interview, but the general one, I'll read it out. I would say, hi, my name is Jess, and I'm a senior at the University of Southern California studying communication and minoring in cinematic arts. I have 4 years of experience in publicity, communication, and client-based roles, and I'm incredibly passionate about how the weight of words influence diverse professional environments. I want to pursue a career where I have the opportunity to grow and apply my skills to a variety of exciting projects. I am passionate about working within a driven and collaborative environment, and based on XYZ experiences and skills, I believe that this position would be a perfect fit. In addition to my professional pursuits, I love reading and writing and hope to join a team where I can expand upon my skills and make valuable contributions. Now, of course, this is definitely tailored to a more creative, collaborative team environment. If you're someone who's maybe going into the medical field or something more sciencey, you would definitely use this as an opportunity to share your hard skills, whether that's, coding or certifications. Yeah, I think this is definitely an opportunity to just highlight different facets of yourself that make you the most qualified, yeah, person for this position.
Awesome. Okay, so I know I've been talking for a second. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to put them in the chat if you do, or message us directly. We're happy to answer them. I just want to take a pause because I know we've been talking for a sec. No worries if not also. It's totally okay. Cool. Okay, so as a reminder, just like stop us anytime if you do come up with any. Okay, so we were when this was in person, we were gonna make you guys do this out loud. Since it's virtual, we're gonna be nice and not make you do this. But we encourage everyone to take a couple of minutes after this session to think about what your elevator pitch would be, write down a couple of things, and really get that in your head because it's a great activity to prepare for an interview. I also got a quick question in the chat, so I'm just going to read that really quick. We can go over it. So someone asked, does that differ during the first and second round interview? Okay, so I think they mean, does like your 2 minute like blurb at the start differ? Typically, I found that first and second round interviewers are with different people. So I think it's good to keep like a similar elevator spiel pitch just because the new interviewer might not know that about you. Like if it's the same interviewer, you maybe don't need to say it, but I think if it's a different interviewer, I definitely would say it. I don't know what your opinion is on that, Jess.
I would definitely say you keep it pretty consistent, but in a lot of the more recent interviews I've done, I do have this more of an HR person and then someone directly on the team. So I would do research on those two individuals ahead of time and be able to mention things, whether it's something in their LinkedIn profile or yeah, like things that, you kind of just also want to establish that personal like tidbit between you and the interviewer. So I think by tailoring your information to specifically their profile, whether it's an HR individual or someone on the actual team, I do think tweaking it is a little important, but also making sure that you're conveying similar information because like Lila said, they're two different people. They might not know the same things.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that's a really good point, Jess. Like an interview really is like putting a face to the words they've been reading about you. Like it's a very personal experience. Like you want to make a connection. And so it's good for them to learn information about you. And like you really want it to be like a very personable, connecting experience. Rather than like a super like, yeah, I think what Jess is saying is perfect. Okay, I got another question. So they said for the recent experience in the self-introduction, should you talk about experiences not outlined in your resume or expand on the ones you did? I would say for self-introduction, I would say don't. What are your thoughts, Jess? I'm trying to think.
I would definitely not resume drop. I would
Yeah.
not use your whole introduction to resume drop, but say you're applying for a publicity job and you recently had a publicity internship, I would mention that.
Mhm.
Um, if you don't have maybe any incredibly relevant experience, I would keep it broader because you only do have a couple minutes to make that first impression. But if it is something incredibly relevant, I would definitely mention that.
I agree. I think for the first like the 2, 3 minute like introduction, don't read off your resume, like don't read anything specific like that. And then there'll definitely be chances in the rest of the interview to expand on resume experiences. So I think Jess is right, like mention anything really relevant, but don't go too deep into anything. Like you just really don't have the time in that question, and then expand on that later. Does that make sense for who asked the question? If not, feel free to message back in the direct message. Okay, there was another question. Is there any specific things to keep in mind when interviewing with a recruiter?
I think that similar to what we said, making sure that you're tailoring your answers to that specific individual and the specific role. I think that coming in and showing that you're prepared and that you're excited about the position, whether or not you actually are excited, by showing that, that you did your research and you clearly you want the position. I think you're positioning yourself at a better spot than maybe other candidates. And also keeping in mind that again, everyone is just a person, right? Like you want to really establish that sense of yeah, personality between you two because of course you're being hired off of your experiences and your education, but also it's the way that you're coming across. And people want to hire people that they want to work with. So, yeah, I think keeping those things in mind. Do you have anything else?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think there's a misconception that sometimes like the screening call or the like recruiter call is less personal. Like if it is, I mean, if it's AI, it is less personal. But if it is with a like recruiter, like they have personal experience too. Like they have tons of stuff they want to talk about. I would say like in my past experience, sometimes I come into an interview always prepared with questions, which we'll get into later. But sometimes the recruiters can't answer those questions, is definitely something that you might come up with. So if you know it's like a screening call or a recruiter call, coming up with more like logistical questions rather than like what tasks you're doing in the position or questions about the organization. Like if they're an outside recruiter, they might not know those questions. So that's the only other thing I would say kind of about that difference. But yeah. Okay, awesome. And then two more questions. Sometimes I'm afraid my elevator pitch would get too long, especially when I talk about my experiences. Any advice on that? I think that's totally a real worry. I'm always worried I'm like rambling too much. It's like totally a fear I have. My advice is to keep it, I would say under 3 minutes. Obviously, you can go longer, but there's going to be so much time in the interview, and they're going to ask you so many questions where you can expand on those things in your resume. So I would highlight, think of what you really want to talk about, put some of it in your elevator pitch, and then everything you can't fit in there, just keep in the back of your mind as stuff you want to bring up for other questions. Um, yeah, because I think if there's a big interview, you don't need to tell them everything in the first question. But I totally get that fear. I think it's just one of those things you've got to practice and time yourself, as like geeky as that sounds.
Yeah, I know I keep saying it and I probably sound like a broken record, but I really do think that tailoring your content to the position and to the person you're speaking with is incredibly important because, by just addressing who and what you're speaking, about and to, you're able to kind of take away or cut, I guess, some of your information to make sure that it's as specific and relevant as possible.
Okay. Last question we got was, what are your thoughts on group interviews? That is a really good question. I personally, I'm not a fan of group interviews. I've done two in the past. One was for a fellowship and one was for a job. I don't think they're that common, but my advice is go into it with a very collaborative mindset. I think that a lot of times, at least what I've heard post group interviews from like the interviewer, is that they're not necessarily looking for the person who has like the best idea or can come up with the best like end product. They're looking for who can work in a team. Like that's usually what like a group or collaborative interview is designed to test. And so I would say like make sure you're not dominating conversation or not talking at all and like try and include everyone and just like show that you can work in a team, you can work with other people, I think is kind of my best tip for group interviewers. But yeah, like totally get the fear around them. Like they make me nervous too. It's one of those things you just kind of have to experience it. Jess, have you been in one before?
Yeah, I've only been in one, and I have the same advice. I do think that they're definitely testing to see how well you work with other people and if you're able to, successfully create ideas and then bounce ideas off of others. So I would just say, go in with a flexible mindset, don't be too strict to what you planned because you never know how, someone else may. I think it's more about how you react as opposed to how you act. Yeah, I think going in with the collaborative mindset is probably just the best way to attack it. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Um, awesome. Those are such great questions. Thank you guys for asking them. Keep them coming throughout the presentation. Like we're super happy to talk about these things. I know there's a lot of questions. Like there's a lot of anxiety around interviews. Like I get really bad anxiety for interviews too. So like we're super, super happy to answer these questions. Okay. So now, how to answer these questions we just detailed. So as we kind of said before, the most important thing is reading job descriptions, reading the websites of whatever organization it is. And then I just wanted to especially highlight the qualifications and tasks that they put in job descriptions. So like the qualifications that they want someone to have, and then the tasks that you would complete as an intern. And then my advice is that during the interview, you want to highlight those skills and qualities that they've already expressed that they're looking for. And then some jobs will also have tabs like on their website about the hiring process or what they're looking for in an applicant. This is often, I think, at like bigger organizations, so it definitely won't be every organization you apply to. But there's an example on the right for a job I actually recently applied for. Like they were just talking about specific things that they wanted applicants to show. So I made sure to talk about that when I was interviewing.
Yeah, so this is another example, as you can see in the little what you'll do. It's detailing what, the responsibilities and expectations of that position are, and based on the need for fact sheets, infographics, policy news, literature, etc. You would want to tailor your answer to be able to address those things and show that you can do those things because that's obviously what they're asking of the applicants.
Yeah. And then I always want to say, not even just like saying like I have experience writing fact sheets. I think including something that's like, I love writing fact sheets, or like I wrote fact sheets for this position and I really found that it was like valuable for X, Y, and Z. So I think that putting kind of more information to that rather than just like listing qualifications is kind of always a better way to answer that kind of question.
It's also always helpful to have data-driven answers where
Mhm.
you say, I created a fact sheet for a team of 30 people and we saw, numbers of whatever, an increase in XYZ. So I think showing that your actions had positive outcomes is also important to demonstrate you don't just know how to do it, you can do it and do it very well.
I agree.
So, what are some common themes in your interviews? You want to tell a story. So, kind of like similar to what I just said, you want to prepare for these like general questions and then be able to provide them with a detailed explanation of a situation that you went through, the task at hand. As you can see, we faced supply chain shortages, etc. And then you want to show how you actually applied this, what your action was. You solved, you calculated. And then the results of that, which would be more data-driven information where the impact of your action showed XYZ.
Yeah. So using the STAR method, it's really helpful when thinking of like how to tell these like stories or anecdotes that you're going to bring up in interviews. I think something that I sometimes struggle with is like I get lulled into a sense of like security and like familiarity if we're like kind of like joking around with the interviewer and like if you build a good rapport. And so I think that using the STAR method really helps make sure you're telling like professional, concise stories that like make sense from beginning to end. And so it makes sure that you're kind of not just like saying something that happened and then like not analyzing it at all. So I think that by kind of thinking about a couple of experiences that you've had prior to an interview, so a lot of times that I'll talk about is like group projects in class, like a big paper, a big assignment, like a big task from an internship. And I'll think about things that like I've learned from them or like deliverables I made. And then I'll use this method to outline like what I would say in an interview if someone asked me a question that was then relevant to this experience. And that helps make sure you're not just like rambling on and talking about yada, 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 and make sure you're really telling an impactful story and an impactful anecdote rather than just kind of like fluff, if that makes sense. Okay, so we're on to one of the last parts of the interviewing section. But kind of honestly, my number one tip, ask questions. You should prepare at least 3 questions in advance to have in your back pocket, because they will, I would say, 100% of the time in interviews I've experienced, asked at the very end, okay, and what are your questions? You don't want to say, oh, I don't have any. So I would say always prepare questions. If you have questions that come up during the interview, like ask those instead, obviously, but it's good to have a backup couple of questions because it solidifies your interest and it shows that you have care and intention about this position. And then for questions, you should ask things that can't easily be found online or are personal to like the role of the person you're speaking with. So like you don't want to ask like, what's the company's mission? It's like, well, if you Googled that, you could find it immediately. Like they're taking time and energy out of their day to talk to you about this. And so you want to ask questions that are going to be valuable to you, and that can't just be like easily found somewhere else.
Asking questions is also a great way to both demonstrate that you came in prepared and also stand out as an applicant because, like Lila said, if you're asking things that are incredibly redundant and you can find the information online, you're obviously not going to stand out as a great applicant. But if you ask something that maybe no one else has before or something that's genuinely like valuable to both you and the interviewer, is definitely going to be beneficial in terms of getting the role.
I also think getting them, especially if you're interviewing with someone who works at the actual company, like getting them to tell stories about their job and like things that they've really enjoyed doing, like it does help build a personal connection because obviously you want to talk about yourself and things you've done, but getting to know them is also really helpful. It also helps for your follow-up email because then there's something to, you have a little anecdote to include in that, and we're going to touch on that in a couple of slides, but
Yeah, so these are just some examples of potential questions that you can come in prepared to ask. What are the current goals of the company? What are the learning and professional development opportunities I would have in this role? What do you think are the most important qualities for someone? What do you like best about working at this company? Essentially, these were all just questions, like we said before, that are establishing both rapport and interest in the company and the position.
yeah. And then the final question on this slide, is there anything I've said in this interview or anything on my resume that you'd like me to expand on? I was told by an interviewer that this got me a job, me asking this question. They like loved it. So like don't ask it in every interview, but I found it to be really successful because then it gives them a chance to think about what they know about you. And then you can also, if there's any misconceptions or concerns, you can clear that up. And so I think it's a really, really helpful way to kind of further kind of like demonstrate who you are as a candidate, and then you can talk about stuff you haven't had the chance to talk about before. Okay, so
I see
this
that we got a question in the chat. So how do we ask questions? How do the questions we ask at the end differ between the initial screening call and the next round with the team member slash hiring manager, and which questions are best for the initial screening call?
That's a good question. I think questions depend on who's interviewing you. So if you know obviously who it is, you can ask specific questions. So if it's going to be like who your team leader would be, you want to ask more like team specific questions. If it's someone like lower down in the office, like you can ask more like general questions about like office culture. You can ask about like the organization and stuff like that. For recruiter questions, I was mentioning that earlier, but if they don't work for the organization, it might be harder to get answers for like organization specific questions or position specific questions because they might not know the answer. That doesn't mean you can't ask the questions though, because that still demonstrates initiative. Um, yeah, I don't know. Just what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, and I keep saying it, but I really do think just doing your research and um yeah, I guess tailoring your questions to each individual is important. I can say that, in one of the last interviews I had, it was the first round was with an HR manager, but she was a USC graduate, so I was able to like, reference USC related things, and we were able to kind of hit a subject on that. So I think, yeah, just I guess doing your research on the individual person, and I think HR versus the team member or the team lead. I think in terms of the team questions, you definitely want to be highlighting, the way that you guys would be working in a collaborative or team environment, because you would have direct contact with that individual as opposed to a recruiter or an HR manager. So yeah, I guess I would just tailor it to the
Yeah.
person.
And then I also think tailoring it is such great advice, but like you are going to go on interviews where you don't know who's going to be your interviewer. Like it's just a reality that sometimes that happens. Like sometimes you don't have that information going in. So that's when I would just prepare like position specific, organization specific questions, and then hopes other stuff comes up in the interview you can ask about. But if it doesn't, organization specific questions are always good too. Um, and then if I'm asking three questions, do you think we should start with, is there anything I've said in this interview that you have a question about? I think that should be your last question. That's always my thought is I think that should be your last question because I think it's always more important to ask like company specific questions, organization, position specific questions. So you're learning more about the role and they can see that you're interested. I always ask that last if there's time for it because I think it's the least important of all the questions.
Yeah, I agree. I would do it last. It also leaves the person interviewing you kind of thinking about
Mhm.
you more than they would have if you had asked that first. So I would definitely save that question for last.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Thanks for asking questions, guys. Okay, so now on to following up. So you've had the interview, you said bye. You should always, always, always follow up after an interview. They took time out of their day to answer your questions and to ask questions about you and learn about you. And so it is very, very, very encouraged to send a follow-up thank you. My best practice for that is sending a short, specific thank you note after every round. And then I always say within 24 hours. And so, like, if it was a morning interview, I'll send it in the afternoon. If it was like a late afternoon interview, I'll send it the next morning. I don't want to send it just like an hour later, just because then if you send it like 6 hours later, then you get them thinking about you again. And so it just kind of reaffirms you as a candidate in their mind. And then the structure for that, like it can be super short, super sweet. You just want to, I usually send it by email. You can send them by post it. I mean, I know people say to like do it like in person or like mail it, but I think nowadays email is kind of probably the move. Um, oh, okay. And then for the formula for that, you just want to say like, dear whoever it is, Thank you so much for this interview. And then you want to include a specific detail from your interview so they remember who you were because they might have interviewed like 20 people that day. And so you want to include like a specific little factoid from your interview to get them kind of thinking about you again, especially if they told like a story about themselves. You can talk about like how much you loved hearing about that. And then just like a thank you at the end. And I look forward to hearing from you soon. And that's really it.
Yeah, it's definitely just common courtesy, and also helps keep you in the forefront of their mind as well, and shows that you're interested in the position. So yeah, I would definitely follow all of those things. I don't think I have too much to add to it as well. Yeah, I would say that it doesn't matter exactly the timing around when you send it, as long as it's within the first like 24 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's not a hard rule. That's just kind of like my habit to doing it. A lot of times I'll write it right after the interview and then like schedule send it for later just so I don't forget about it. And then I saw there's a question in the chat like, what if the interview is on a Friday? Do you follow up that same day or wait till Monday? I would follow up that same day. You should always send it like in business hours on business days. So I would send it the same day. I think even if it's like an afternoon on a Friday, I'd still probably just send it the same day.
Yeah, I would as well. I would say that in terms of these thank you notes, it's incredibly important to be sending these, in interviewing, in networking, in just any
Mhm.
professional kind of call that you're having, sending a thank you note is, I think when I want to say expected in a way that if you don't do it, you look a little unprofessional. So it's definitely recommended to send one.
Yeah, I think that like the contents of your thank you note is never gonna make or break your application, but I think not sending one could make or break your application. So I don't think like stress too much about like I can't remember a super specific detail. Like it's gonna be okay. Like say something general, but send the email either way. Cool. Now we're gonna open the floor back up. Does anyone have any other questions about interviewing? We're just gonna cover offers super quickly after that. But we just want to hold it on interviewing. And then if you think of any questions, like feel free to keep asking them in the chat. Cool. So now we're going to go into offers just really quickly. Offers follow interviews, and I also think that they're really just not talked about enough in the internship process. I think that like especially in my like freshman and sophomore year, I was like, I'll take anything anyone sends to me, like I'll take any job offer, but you really do need to like read the offer letters and like if especially if you're comparing jobs and stuff like that, like that's something that's really important. So we're gonna talk about the difference between a verbal offer and a letter, what should be in your letter, communication, and then next steps.
Yeah, so first off would be that verbal offer where a company connects with you via phone or in person to let you know that you've been selected for the position that you've been interviewing for. And this is typically significantly more informal than an official letter, and then you will soon after get that official letter. And after the verbal offer is made, you always want to thank them. You want to restate your interest, ask about the official letter because of, like we said, a verbal offer is not a structured, a real like agreement. You definitely need to have that official letter, and then always follow up with the post conversation if you have more questions about what that letter would entail, so on and so forth.
I see we just got another question in the chat, so I'm just gonna answer that really quick. Should you approach to the interview change if it's virtual versus in person? If so, how? I have an in-person interview coming up. It's a second panel interview. The first one. Okay, what are your thoughts on virtual versus in person?
I've had both, and I think that in terms of virtual, you definitely have that leeway of having notes up kind of on your computer or on your wall. So in terms of you should always prepare for your interviews, either way. But when going into my in-person interview, I definitely wanted to prepare in a way that I was able to answer things in a more flexible manner, so I wasn't caught off guard by, if I forgot my script, oh no, I was screwed. But I think by having more so talking points as opposed to a tight script in-person interviews, you're able to be ready for any questions that they throw at you. Um, yeah, I would say I wouldn't change anything. So I'm just reading the question again. Yeah, I wouldn't really change anything in the way that you're approaching it, just making sure that yeah, you're off note. You don't need that script.
Yeah, I agree. I also think my biggest thing for in-person interviews is remembering that like when someone asks you a question, like you're allowed to say, that's a really good question. Let me just think about it for a second. Like you're allowed to take a second to like collect your thoughts. And obviously that's true in virtual interviews as well. But I think people get more flustered in in-person interviews and like it's always okay to be like, let me collect my thoughts for a second, or like, yeah, I just didn't think about that. You know what I mean? Before just like answering immediately off the tongue. Like you're allowed to take a second to think. I don't think much changes. I think in-person interviews are often more formal. So just like make sure you're dressed appropriately and yeah, make sure you're bringing the materials if they ask you to bring things and stuff like that. But it's really pretty similar. Just sometimes more nerve-wracking if it's in person. Um, I turn on Do Not Disturb while I'm in class. What would happen if I missed the verbal awful call? Oh, verbal verbal offer call. I think that I would not be concerned about that if you don't pick up the verbal offer call. Like they'll send you an official offer. Like it's not gonna like negate you from getting the job. Like I think they know that people are busy. They usually follow it up pretty soon with the official offer anyway. You can also always just call back once you're out of class and you see that you missed call. But yeah, it's definitely not a make or break situation there.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. In my summer internship, they had called to do a verbal offer, and I was not on my phone at the time, and they left a voicemail. So then I just immediately called back and you listened to the verbal offer. So yeah, I wouldn't stress about that at all.
Yeah, I would say maybe if they like told you what time you would receive the call or something, like don't have your do not disturb on then. But like truly not a make or break thing. Like they know that you're busy, they know that you're a college student, like they expect you to be in class at some time. So I would not be stressed about that at all. Like you can always follow up after. Okay, we're going to keep going with offers. So these are just some examples of things you can say after receiving an offer. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're reinstating your interest in it and that you're appreciative. But you also want to make sure you're getting all the information you need to know. So, I'm thrilled about the opportunity. Could you provide me with the formal offer that was mentioned? And then if you need any additional information, like happy to provide it. Like, those are just kind of like quick little rules of thumb. You really can't answer an offer that badly, but it's just important to make sure you're fully covering your bases.
Yes, so then an offer letter would be an official written document that an employer is sending to their candidate to formally offer them the job after they successfully completed the interview process and they've been selected for the position. These offer letters are not binding and they are definitely conditional upon your acceptance, and there's typically background checks. They have to, check your transcripts, etc., whatever there may be certifications involved. And it's always really important to read the letter in its entirety to make sure that you're fully understanding the specifications around the job, whether that's the pay, the hours, the location, the team you're working on.
Yeah. I had a job where they tried to pay me less money than the offer letter said, like $1 less. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like I signed a contract that said this. So it's like you want to make sure you're covering your bases. Like that stuff doesn't really happen that often, but like always better know what you're signing on to. And then things to look for, and just like make sure in an offer letter, like job title, description, start date, end date, salary. Benefits is like really more so like full-time positions rather than internships. But I know like a lot of business ones will have that. So if it's in there, important to find it. Reporting structure, location, termination, non-competition, confidentiality, NDAs. Those are all really for like more full-time positions, I think is when you'd really see those come in, but they have come into some internship job offers. So just like important to know that could be there. You should look for it if it is.
This is just an example of what a potential offer letter would look like, and it includes all of the things that we just discussed, where it would be the name of the position, where it is, when you're starting, how much you'd be paid, the name of the supervisor. Yeah, it's all just the information laid out for you in a very easy manner.
Yeah. Okay. And then next steps, like once you've received the formal offer, analyze it, review it, ensure it aligns with everything that you've been told in your interviews and stuff like that. Understand the terms and condition, and then know that like once accepted and once like the background check and everything like that goes through, it becomes a conditional binding agreement. If you're happy with it, respond, accept the offer politely and gracefully. If you're not happy with it or you need more time or waiting to hear back from another position, which I think is kind of what becomes it's more of a problem I think for undergrads as like you apply for You apply for so many positions that sometimes you're waiting to hear back from a position you like better. If you're interviewing for multiple positions, like that's definitely a thing that happens. But you want to be sure that you're communicating that um, with whoever is offering you that, so you're not just like leaving them on red or kind of ghosting them basically. Because if you don't get that other job, like you want to make sure you still have this one. So this is just kind of like an example of something that I would send. Like, I'm deeply grateful for the offer to serve at like whatever position. I'm thrilled to be considered for this opportunity and like reinforce your value. In order to fully evaluate the details of the position and make an informed decision, I just request a few days to look it over. And then you always want to say when you're going to have the definite answer by. Um, just so they know when to expect that. Sometimes they might respond to that and be like, "Can you get it to me by this date?" And then that's something that you're just gonna have to deal with. Like, it's definitely an interactive process about like when you can have the date back. Like, you don't have to sign it immediately. You can ask for more leeway, but while you ask for more leeway, they can also ask for the leeway right back if they need a more immediate answer. So it's just something to be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in my experience, it's always important to let those positions know, if you've been offered something that you don't necessarily want, but you want to be kind about it. So sending something like that, and then um, a few weeks later or so, I've had emailed and, told them that I was moving on with a different position, and it was very cordial and professional. And now, flash forward, I am going to end up be working in a professional sense with the person that I had initially passed on. So I think just making sure that you're not burning any bridges and you're, staying professional in all of your interactions is really important.
Yeah. I also think if the scenario is that you're waiting to hear back from like your dream position and you're just like sitting on this offer, like don't tell them that. Like don't write and be like, "Yeah, I'm just waiting to hear back. And if I get this, like I'll take it." Like you want to be professional. You don't need to provide the details of like why it's taking you time to do it. Like they can make that decision for themselves. Because a lot of time also it's like, can you figure out if you can relocate and stuff like that? Like there is a lot of things to consider when you're finding jobs and finding internships. So they're not necessarily going to jump to like you're interviewing in a different place. So don't feel like you have to share that information, and also don't share that information. Like they're not gonna like hearing that. Someone in the chat asked if we can share the slide again. Do you mean which this slide?
At the end, if anyone
Offer letter?
needs the
Oh, this slide.
slides, we can always send the slides or particular slide
Yeah.
if there's information that you missed and want to take note of.
Yeah. So this is the offer letter slide again. If anyone wants to take a picture of that or anything like that, we'll just leave it up for a second. Okay. Continuing on. Oh yeah, so this is just another thing. Like if you're choosing between multiple offers, things to consider, like opportunity to return full time. Like, do they have a strong professional development track where oftentimes they invite interns if they do successfully complete the internship to return full time? Like that's an amazing benefit. If your career goals align, benefits, projects that you'd be working on, like the level of the position, mentorship and professional development opportunities, relation to your major career path, and then finally like compensation and livability are like really a lot of times kind of the biggest factor that comes up to it. If one of the internships is in a different state and you can live at home for one of them, like you're saving thousands of dollars staying there. So like that's usually one of the big decision factors. But it's just important to think of all of the things that are kind of relevant when picking between things.
Yeah, I think it's also great to figure out what different things you're prioritizing. Like Lila said, whether that's money or, the opportunity for career growth, whichever one stands out to you as the most important in terms of deciding what you're going to be doing for that semester or that summer. It's a really great way to help you narrow down the opportunities that you've been offered.
Yeah. And then I think a good example of this is last summer when I was interning for the senator. I was offered both the Chicago office and the DC office. She's an Illinois senator, and then I was local to Chicago, so I could live at home and just like commute in and not have to pay rent or anything really. And so for me, with my career goals, like I was much more interested in working in like policy than working specifically on the Hill. If I'd wanted to work on the Hill for the rest of my life or was interested in that, like it would have been worth it for me to go to DC and pay that money because that would have been a better internship for me. But for me, it wasn't better enough that I was willing to pay like however much DC rent for 3.5 months is. And so that's why I ended up picking the Chicago one instead, even though a lot of people would argue that the DC one would have been a better experience. That's just kind of an example of those decisions.
I've
Does
also
anyone
found, oh no, sorry, I cut you off. Then you keep talking.
go?
Oh, no, I was just gonna say that also now there are a lot of positions that are both virtual and hybrid, so keeping a mind of those as well if there's an opportunity that you want that's not necessarily in the physical location that you're in. A majority of my internships that I've had while, still attending USC, well, during the academic school year were virtual, and those were great opportunities to be able to work with people that were not in LA. And you wouldn't be able to get that experience otherwise. So, yeah, I think it's great to just keep your horizons broad when you're looking at things.
Yeah. And then I just got a couple of messages in the chat about slides. Our emails are at the very last slide. So if you're interested in the slides, if you have any questions or anything like that, like send us an email and we're happy to send anything over. Does anyone have any questions about offers or interviews? Kind of our final question period. We'll leave it a second in case people are typing. And then also, if you came in late, there's a QR code that was sent in the chat. Please scan it so you can sign in, just so we can track attendance and make sure we have all your contact information to contact you about upcoming events and stuff like that. Okay. While we're waiting to see if there's any more questions, we're just gonna go to our last slide. This is the one I was just saying. But if you have any more questions or you want one-on-one help preparing for an interview or anything else like career oriented, you can sign up for our office hours. I have them Mondays and Wednesdays from 11 to 1 p.m. and you can book 30-minute sessions, and then Jess has hers Tuesdays from 1:40 to 4:30. And the same thing, 30-minute sessions. But then if none of those times work for you, like we totally get it, like super busy, you're more than welcome to email us and we can find a time to meet one-on-one. I specialize in government, legal, and policy internships, and then Jess specializes in communication, entertainment, and media. But we're super happy to talk about anything. We definitely are more than qualified to speak on kind of internships in general. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to do so. You can find our advising hours in Handshake. They're under the Career Center appointments. And if you're having any trouble finding them, like feel free to send us an email and we're more than happy to help you book them. I saw that someone sent a question somewhere in that. What are some things to avoid in a Zoom call interview? That is a good question, Jess.
I would say right off the bat, because they're able to see you, it's not a phone call, so come in looking professional. Do your hair, if just make sure you're in something that's appropriate attire. And also ensure that, while you are able to have notes accessible to you, do not look like you're reading from a script the whole time. I think that can be very tempting because you do have your computer screen in front of you, but it is pretty clear to tell who's actually just riffing and who's talking off their mind versus who's reading something. So that's something to be aware of as well. But otherwise, I would say a Zoom interview is no different than, any other interview that you would have.
Yeah. Um, Definitely second that. Like, you don't want to sound robotic or like you're reading off a script or anything because they know that you have the opportunity to have that kind of stuff. So I think they're definitely looking for that. I also think just like make sure you're still conducting yourself professionally, like professional background. If you're in like if I was in an interview right now, I'd blur my background. Make sure like I've had to do interviews while I had a roommate, like make sure the roommate's out of the room, or if the roommate's in the room, go somewhere else, go to a different setting. The Career Center actually has interview rooms that you can book out if you need somewhere to interview. Like that's a really great resource to use. So highly recommend that. Oh, someone booked it. That's awesome. Yeah, so that's a super great resource if you need a professional environment to do that. Yeah, but I think for the main thing for Zoom interviews is what Jess said. Like, don't read off a script. Like, you still want to come across really genuine and personable. Okay, there was another question. Oh, thank you. Lauren sent how you can access our appointments in the chat if anyone's at all curious about that. Someone asked, I worked at a company for internship and I'm currently doing a co-op with them. They haven't mentioned anything full time. How do I start that conversation with them?
I would say I personally haven't been in this situation, but from my experience just, being in internships and potentially wanting to extend them. I think an in-person conversation is always better than asking something via email. I actually did have an experience where it was with my first internship where I had, asked to have a chat with my advisor just about the experience. I'm not exactly sure how I phrased it, but it was something along the lines of, just asking to hop on a quick phone call or, meeting to talk about the experience. And then I had brought up wanting to potentially, how much I loved the experience and potentially extending it to the summer. So I think in terms of that, I would just make sure the conversation is being had either face to face or on the phone as opposed to in an email. Yeah, Lila, do you have any other advice?
Yeah, it's hard because I haven't been in that situation myself, so I'm not sure exactly how you approach that. Um, I think, yeah, I would agree with what Jess is saying, like definitely a face-to-face or on the phone conversation. I also think approach it with don't have the attitude of like you're entitled to getting that return offer or anything like that. Like there's some places that just don't do return offers like that. Like maybe they don't have a position or anything like that. So I think go at it from like a position of like curiosity and career growth and just like interest in the company and like express that interest, but also don't verbally ask for that, if that makes sense. But yeah, that's definitely a tough situation. Okay. I think there was another question. Do you recommend us to send a separate email and sending a thank you or just reply to the old email thread?
For me personally, I like to continue an email thread because then if that, individual wants to refer back to old information, it's all in one easy and accessible place for them to find it. So yeah, that would be my advice to just keep all of the information in one email thread.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I do. I think the only time I wouldn't do that if I've had a couple of interviews that are two-on-one interviews. And so like there'd be if the email thread's with one person, but another person was in the interview along with that person, I would start a new email just so I could make sure both of them were included, and like loop them into that. But I think otherwise I would respond in a thread. Awesome. Well, if you have more questions, feel free to ask them. Jess and I are going to stick around for a couple of minutes, but thank you all so much for attending this session. We really appreciate it. We hope it was valuable. If you have any questions, once again, like feel free to send us an email. We're super happy to talk, book an appointment. Super happy to chat there too. But if you have any more last minute questions, feel free to stick around. Me and Jess will be here for a sec. But thank you guys so much and have a good rest of your nights.
Thank you guys.
Do y'all have any questions? Ah,
Well,
nice. Oh,
sorry, I think you're
you're
muted.
muted.
Sorry, did you want to stop the recording?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Perfect.